T-level training, getting ready to assess the occupational specialism bite-sized session, which will focus on one of the new occupational specialisms of investment banking and asset and wealth management. Is a new occupational specialism which has not yet had a summer series or a live paper at the point that this training has been recorded. We have utilised the sample assessment materials for this occupational specialism. So if you'd like to go and follow along with those by downloading this from the website and looking at them as we go through, I have included snippets of the tasks and mark schemes, but there is so much information in there that it's not been possible to include all of them. So it's really useful if you can have those sample assessment materials for this one alongside. So when I'm talking you through it, you can see how it looks in its full sort of detail and not just the snippets that we've sort of cut out to use in this training for you. That we'd like you to do while we're thinking and we're looking through these different tasks, and we will talk through some as we go through, are what skills do you think that learners are going to need to help them handle the resource booklet? So these are the task sheets that they're being given, or the stimulus material. And how do you think you can help them develop these skills? So we will talk through some examples and ideas as we go through, but it's useful to note down anything else that you think from your professional practice that you know would also be useful. And then at task 1, as you can see here, these are sort of, as we said, a snippet of the task. There is a lot more stimulus material if you look in the sample assessment materials. It starts out with the set task brief. So students are going to be given a range of information. So here you can see they've been given a name, marital status, dependents, reason for the meeting, employment, income, those sorts of things. And then you can see as we move over onto the right, they're going to be given the tasks. So in this instance, they've been asked, been told that they would like to spend £50,000 on a holiday lodge in the next 2 years. And then they've been asked to prepare a report which analyses the features, risks and benefits of the different strategies, and then a justified recommendation. So you can see at the bottom there I've included a couple of the strategies that they could utilise, but there are more that are available for the students to consider in the task. So when you're preparing them and teaching them exam technique, it's going to be really important that they understand when they're looking at this what information they're being provided, so what stimulus material is there, and then what they're going to be asked to do with it. So it's going to be useful to look through it and go, okay, so here's the information, what we're going to extract, what do you need to know? Is things like maybe linked to the company recommended by an existing client relevant? Is it not? Do they need to consider that? So it's all sorts of things that you could sit there with them and think about. Obviously, they've got income. You can see they've got £70,000 a year. They want to spend £50,000 on a holiday lodge. Is that sort of something that's appropriate? Is it not? So they're the sorts of conversations that you can start having in year 1, or even in a transition year if you're doing the transition T level, so they get used to making these sorts of decisions and having these sorts of conversations. Students might not necessarily have thought about these sorts of investments or these sorts of figures prior to starting on the T level. So the sooner you can get them used to having conversations around, well, if I've got £45,000 in cash and £20,000 sort of in shares, and then I've got this income and I want to do that, what would be the best outcome? The easier they will find this occupational specialism, because they'll be comfortable with it. They'll know what they're doing. Also, it might be useful if you can do sort of formative assessment with them. So whilst the tasks, you'll notice that on when you look at sort of past papers of the occupational specialism, the tasks stay fairly constant. So they'll always maybe be asked to do an analysis and a recommendation. So you can swap out the stimulus material. So you could change these numbers for any sort of numbers or facts and figures that you want to give. You could build up maybe like a bank of case studies of people that you could use, and you could supplement them in, or you could go and use any of the sort of personal finance for schools activities where they give you these sorts of case studies and ask you to think about investments, and you could include them in. And then what you could do then is get them to practice doing these activities. So what features, what risks, what benefits. Maybe you could even get them to learn how to color code it in certain colors so they know what's going where. Um, and then you can sort of get them familiar with it. It's also important to note that for this task, they are going to get 3 marks for the quality of written communication. So they are being asked to produce a report. So they will get marks for the structure of their report, for how clear and concise their answer is, and whether they're using the appropriate technical and non-technical language for the audience. So in this instance, we've got a customer. So it might be that you're not expecting to see as much technical language as if maybe you were talking to another advisor. So it's just around those sorts of things. So it's taking the time to teach those students that exam technique and how to read the scenario, read the stimulus material, and then apply that within the reports that they're doing. Mark scheme then. Within the occupational specialism, it's mostly going to be what we call levels-based marking, as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. So there are four bands here, or 3 bands and a band 0. Band 0 is typically going to mean there is virtually nothing there. It's either going to be a blank page, they might have their name on it, they might have put the headings on and not written anything else. But generally speaking, it's going to be an absence of any rewardable content. If they've written sort of a sentence that's vaguely relevant, it's likely then to start moving into that band 1. Okay, so if you look at band 1, it's talking about limited detail. It's also talking about partially relevant. So what the student is talking about might be relevant to, say, risks or to the scenario, but it might not be applicable at all. They might have just gone, oh, I know all of these strategies, I'll just write all these strategies down, rather than picking the most relevant strategy or recommendation in their reports. As we then move up into band 2, these are going to be generally detailed or mostly relevant. So these students, these are maybe what you might refer to more as a good type of response. So they're going to have, like, they've used that stimulus material, they've picked out key points, they're making recommendations that are relevant, but they might just have missed one sort of important one, or maybe some of the recommendations aren't the best compared to maybe some others. So they've got the vast majority of it right, but there's still a few gaps in there. And then as you move up into band 3, so this top band here, this is going to be thoroughly detailed. So these are the students who, when you look at it, you could pick this up and without an awful lot of work, you could actually present it to a client as a recommendation. So it might be that maybe they've just missed some minor bits out, or maybe there's some bits in there and you're thinking, well, I'm not sure that's really relevant. But these are the students that when you look at it, you think, well, actually, that's a really, really good attempt. They've covered all the main areas. They've got all the main bits. Those recommendations are really relevant for the scenario that we've got in front of us. Now, on the left, what you can see is you've got what we call indicative content and marker guidance. So this is what the examiners will look at. Now, when you see indicative content, that doesn't mean they're the only answers that a student can give unless it specifically states that. So if this was a finance question, there was a specific answer, then that would be the only answer they could give. Whereas when you've got these sorts of questions where you've got stimulus material and students come up with a whole wide range of recommendations based on what they're seeing, the indicative content is there as an example of what the senior examiners think learners will do with the information they've got in front of them. Okay, students, they're looking at this and they're giving you examples here of strategies and benefits and those sorts of things. If, however, a student comes up with something that is not in the indicative content, but it is accurate and it is appropriate, then the examiner can award it. That's why examiners on these occupational specialisms are experienced, they are specialists. It's because they have that ability to look at what the student is recommending and to say, actually, that would be a relevant recommendation, and therefore they can award it. So please don't think if you see these indicative content that that's what the student has to do. It's a really good example of what they could do, but if they go a little bit sort of outside of that, as long as what they've got is relevant and appropriate, then the examiner can sort of award within that. You might have seen things like award any other appropriate answer. That's what this is sort of hinting at. So when you look through and you see those, please don't worry if students are coming up with stuff that's not on the mark scheme. If it's right, give them the marks in sort of their formative assessment. Here, this is task 2 again. This is a small snippet of what is available in the actual sample assessment materials for this. I've just given sort of a representative sample. So you can see here again, they've been given a little bit of a set task brief telling them that they're working as an assistant analyst in an investment banking organisation, what they've been doing, and then the task over here is asking them to respond to the stimulus material. So again, they will get 3 marks for their quality of written communication. So it's going to be important to teach students how to structure emails and obviously reports and presentations. The other benefit of this is a lot of employers who have had students come out to them are saying that emails is something they really struggle with because it's not something they necessarily do in school or college or in a centre. So if you can teach your learners how to write really good quality emails, not only will it benefit them on the occupational specialism, it is going to be a real benefit to them in the workplace. So it might be worth getting together with a few of your employers and maybe seeing if they'll come in and run skills workshops for you. Things like how to structure an email, how to write a report, how to respond to clients, all those sorts of things, because it just gives them more skills. So if we go back to task 2 then, you can see that they have been given an email from a client, and then what they've been asked to do is using the template, so they get given a sort of an email template. They've been asked to write an analysis of the features, risks and benefits, and then they've been asked to give a justified recommendation. So it's not too dissimilar to that task 1 we looked at where they were looking at stimulus material, assessing what was going on or analysing what was going on, and then making those justified recommendations. So again, when you're teaching sort of exam technique, you can show them how it's sort of going across the different tasks. The task 2 mark scheme is very similar to what you saw for task 1. On the left here, you've got that indicative content of things that students could mention in their answer. But again, if they've got something that's outside of that in terms of their recommendations, then obviously if it is appropriate, then it is rewardable. And then on the right there, you can see that those mark bands are there. They're exactly the same. You've got your limited detail, partially relevant. Then you move into band 2, you've got your generally detailed and your mostly relevant. And up into that top band there, it's thoroughly detailed and thoroughly relevant. So they can see that they've got that consistency there. So when they're learning how to structure these and what they need to include, it follows across. And obviously down the bottom there, we've got the information on the advice. And again, that's been divided up that way. If you look at the full mark scheme that's for the SAM that's on the website, you'll see that there's more sort of these in there. And as you go through, they're all fairly consistent in terms of the language they're using and the way that they're structured. So it's useful maybe if you're doing formative feedback and you're not so confident maybe in giving them marks, or you don't like to give them marks, maybe use that language instead. Maybe use that limited, generally detailed and thoroughly detailed so that they know where they're falling rather than relying on what the marks are. To task 3 then, you can see that we have got the stimulus material there on the left, so the set task brief. So they've been told that obviously they've already identified the needs of a client, of the investment client and then the banking client, and then they've been asked to present sort of a pitch to them per se. So they've been given 10 minutes to communicate their recommendations in their presentation, and then 10 minutes to communicate their investment banking recommendations. So they've got the time there to prepare, and then they've got the time there to obviously present it. So you've got here, record a message to the assessment and wealth management client, talking them through their advice that was given in task 1 and the things that they've been asked to include. So the features of investment strategies and the potential risks and benefits. It's important to note that it clearly says here your recording should be no longer than 10 minutes. So if students like to talk, then they need to learn to get it down below 10 minutes. And if students are hesitant, then maybe they're going to want to practice on their presentations and structuring their slide decks so that they can get up or not up to the 10 minutes. It might not necessarily be a slide deck, obviously, because they're recording it as a recording, but if this were to be a presentation where they were pitching, then obviously their slide decks would need to be appropriate length. And in terms of these ones, because they're specifically recordings, the notes that they've got in front of them are sufficient that it will take at least sort of 2/3 to 3/4 of the time, because it might be that they're going to struggle to convey all of this information if they're only using 3 or 4 minutes. And it's equally the same, you can see down there for 3B, they're going to do exactly the same thing, record your message, talk about the features, the risks, the benefits of the products and services, and again, 10 minutes. So again, they've just got to think about that. In terms of in your centre, that's going to be quite a chunk of time. You're going to have to stop, get them to change over and maybe restart. If you're going to do these as 2 separate recordings, you're going to need to plan for the time for that. So maybe if it's 20 minutes, you're going to need to allow half an hour. You're also going to have to allow for, if you've got multiple cohorts on the go, you're going to have access to the equipment you need. Have you got microphones or dictaphones or something that's going to record these for you? Are they available? Do you need to book them out in advance? So when you're thinking about these sort of resources, plan ahead, because the more T-levels or other sort of assessments that are going on, the harder these are going to be. If you're lucky enough to have funding, then maybe that's something to consider when you're setting up the course. Can I spend some of the funding on getting these materials that I'm going to need for the assessment, like microphones or video cameras or access to equipment, so that you don't have to sort of fight for it across the year? Skip over the mark scheme because they're very similar to what you've seen. It's just going to basically show you what we've looked at in task 1 and task 2. So again, it's going to be those band-based marking, how well they've performed, what sort of depth of detail they've included. So we'll move on to task 4 then. So as you can see here, again, they've started with some stimulus material. In this instance, they've been given 2 case studies to look at. And then you can see on the right there, the activity is that they're going to be asked to produce a report where they consider each of those case studies in turn. And it's clear here, it says for them in your report for each case study. So it's important that the students know that they are going to have to undertake all of these 4 bullets for both of the case studies there, not for one. So it's important that in terms of your exam technique, that when you're teaching them how to read the activities, that they really understand what's being said. So here they're going to have to identify the issue in each. They're going to have to give reasons why. Then they're going to have to come up with the course of action they recommend to resolve it, and then their justifications for that. And they're going to have to do that twice, one for case study 1, one for case study 2. So it's just about, when you're going through these activities with students, making sure that they understand how to use that sort of stimulus material, the set task information. They understand how long they've got to read it and to consider it. They know how to read the activities. So what is it asking them to do? What does that require in terms of depth? And then to plan out their time accordingly. So when they're doing this, it would be really sort of useful to do mock exams, formative assessments if you can, because students get the feel of the time that it takes. Mocks are also really useful to helping out, sort of ironing out those lessons learned. So are IT available and able to do what you need them to do? Can you get access to the recording equipment that you need? Is it easy to access those materials once they're done so you can be able to upload them to the website? It's also really handy with these because you can see the tasks are fairly consistent and they don't tend to change between series. So how they're being presented might change, but the tasks themselves are going to stay fairly consistent. But actually you can go back and you can change that stimulus material if you want to use these for sort of bell work or exam question practice or whatever you want. So for example, at the start of the year, you might start out by just giving them the identify part of each of the tasks. So give them some stimulus material from, I don't know, a GCSE paper, an A-level paper, a BTEC paper, any sort of exam paper you can find, or even sort of case studies that are online that have got relevant information in. Maybe it's news articles you found, or company reports and things. And then as you go through the year, you could ask them to start then doing those other activities, building their resilience and their knowledge. Another place that you can use is the lead examiner reports. So once there's been a live series of these occupational specialisms, in addition to having that live past paper, the live mark scheme, there's also a lead examiner report that accompanies it. And within that report, there's lots of really sort of rich information for you, such as how many people took this occupational specialism, what maybe the lowest and highest mark was, what the mean mark was. But over and above that, it will give you things like what students did well in the cohort, what misconceptions there were that need addressing, what students weren't doing so well. But it'll also include examples of what students have written for each of these tasks, and a commentary on why that's happened, or why they've given the mark, or what was missing. And that's really useful, because then what you can do is you can use it for a range of activities. So say, for example, if you wanted to do some sort of think, pair, share type work, you could give a case study to one student and ask them to identify the issues, and then maybe they pass that on to another student and they give the reasons. You sort of pass it round. It might be that you ask students to anonymously complete the activities and then pass it over to another student, and then they mark it. So you could give them the mark scheme, talk them through how to do it, and then they could go through. Might be you give them the lead examiner report and ask them to improve the activity to make sure that it's really good. So it offers a whole range of activities that you can use to teach the students the exam technique that they're going to need. So hopefully this has been really useful in helping you to sort of understand what the assessment approach is to the occupational specialism in sort of investment banking and asset and wealth management.